Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into the dramatic thousand-year history of a single manuscript.
Hmm.
A book that sold at a private auction in 1998 for upwards of $2 million.
And get this, the book itself is, it's battered, it's moldy, it's been scraped clean.
And it's covered in, of all things, 20th century gold leaf forgeries. It is, quite simply, the Archimedes Palimpsest.
It's a relic, really, but it's also a legal battlefield and the ultimate test case for modern science. When you look at its history, you realize this isn't just some old book.
Right.
It's the earliest surviving witness to the genius of Archimedes, the greatest mathematician of antiquity. It contains treatises that are found nowhere else on Earth, most notably the method.
I think for those who might be unfamiliar with the term, we should probably start there. What exactly is a palimpsest?
Think of it this way. In the medieval period, parchment, which is this expensive processed animal hide, it became incredibly scarce, especially after major geopolitical disruptions.
Okay.
So if a monk needed something to write on, he wouldn't go buy a new book. He'd just grab an existing one, scrape or wash off the original text, and reuse the parchment.
Literally creating a second life for the page.
Exactly, they were recycling.
But in this case, that second life meant destroying, priceless knowledge. Someone decided that the work of Archimedes was less valuable than just having a clean surface to write a new collection of Greek prayers.
And that's the core tragedy, but it's also the core value.
Mm.
So our mission today is to trace this artifact's entire journey, its whole dramatic, chaotic life.
Right.
We need to explore its destruction in the 13th century, its repeated disappearances, the complex legal battle that erupted when it finally resurfaced in New York.
Again, how modern science, amazingly, forced that hidden text back into the light.
And crucially, we're going to examine how this one single case reveals the immense difficulty modern law has when it tries to balance the rights of original owners against people who, purchase cultural property in good faith.
So let's start at the beginning, with the genius himself.
Let's. Archimedes originally wrote the text we're talking about, things like On Floating Bodies and the method around 287 to 212 BC on papyrus scrolls.
Which are long gone.
Oh, long gone. But fortunately, copies were made probably around 1000 AD in Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, at a time when scholars were actively trying to preserve ancient Greek math.
And of all those works, it's the method of mechanical theorems that really elevates this specific manuscript to, well, monumental importance. It's the key text.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Because the genius of Archimedes was that he wasn't just interested in the final answer. He was interested in the process, the discovery.
Right.
In his famous works, he would publish these final, rigorous proofs. But the method. The method reveals his rough notes. It's how he actually figured the problems out in the first place.
This is where it gets really interesting for anyone listening. He wasn't using abstract numbers. He was using physical laws to find mathematical truths.
Precisely. He used what he called mechanical methods. He imagined these complex geometric shapes, like a segment of a parabola or a sphere, as actual physical objects.
Like he could hold them.
Exactly. Then, using the law of the lever and the concept of the center of weights, the centroid, he could balance these shapes against areas or volumes he already knew.
So he's basically saying, if I know this triangle balances this part of a parabola on a lever, I can figure out the unknown area of the parabola. It's physics driving the math.
And this mechanical technique led him to calculate things like the volume of a sphere, a calculation he was, by the way, prouder of than any other. But to do this, he was relying on something we now call indivisibles.
Indivisibles, which are essentially geometric versions of infinitesimals.
Yes.
Wait, infinitesimals, that's the concept. Dealing with infinitely small slices of an area or a volume, that is the foundation of integral calculus, which wasn't formally invented until Newton and Leibniz in the 17th century.
And that is the monumental insight we almost lost. Archimedes was grappling with infinity centuries ahead of everyone. But, and this is key, the concept of indivisibles wasn't considered rigorous, provable math in the Greek tradition.
So he kept it to himself.
Sort of. He didn't publish the method widely. He used it as a discovery tool, but then he went back and proved his results using the accepted but much more painstaking method of exhaustion.
So he knew how to do calculus centuries early, but he kept his discovery methods separate. This document is literally his conceptual bridge to modern science, and it was nearly wiped from existence.
Which brings us to the Great Erasure. Around the early 1200s, this precious copy of his work, likely still in Constantinople, was in a world of chaos. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 by the Fourth Crusade had just devastated the city.
And that led to massive instability and, I imagine, a scarcity of materials.
Exactly. Parchment became almost like currency. So a Christian monk, probably in 1229, maybe in a Palestinian monastery called Mar Saba,
Hmm.
you have to imagine that moment. He wasn't trying to destroy genius, he was trying to survive. He saw expensive material, not monumental history. He cut the pages in half, turned them, applied acid, and scrubbed them clean with a pumice stone.
And just like that, he wrote a collection of Greek prayers, a eulogium, over the faint remains of the method. And it survived for centuries, just hiding in plain sight as a prayer book.
Until its first modern rediscovery in 1906. That's when the Danish philologist Johann Ludwig Heiberg found the manuscript in a library in Constantinople.
An incredible scholar.
A giant in the field. And he immediately recognized the faint, shadowy traces of Archimedes under the prayers. Using just a magnifying glass, he managed to transcribe and photograph what he could see.
Which is an unbelievable feat of scholarship on its own.
It was. But sadly, the manuscript went missing again sometime after 1908.
Yeah.
It was probably stolen during the instability and the evacuation of the Greek Orthodox Library when the Ottoman Empire was collapsing.
It just vanished.
Vanished into the private world for nearly 70 years. And that missing time is where our story shifts from ancient history to, well, a modern legal drama.
So we have this priceless object vanishing during total political chaos. And when it resurfaces, it's not just a math story anymore. It's a modern legal headache.
And the stakes were just enormous. The Palimpsest was bought by a French amateur collector in Istanbul around 1930. It just sat in a Paris home for those 7 decades.
And during that time, it suffered really severe mold damage, and incredibly, it was actively vandalized.
It was.
How was it defaced?
Someone applied these gold leaf forgeries of medieval evangelical portraits onto 4 of the pages.
You're kidding.
I'm not. So not only did it survive the 13th century pumice stone, but then, 70 years ago, some art fraudster decides to ruin it even more by gluing tacky gold portraits right over the text, presumably to make it look more valuable. They had no idea they were covering up the method.
What a bizarre turn. So when the manuscript finally reappears at a Christie's auction in New York in 1998, the alarm bells just go off everywhere.
They do. And the original owner, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, files a lawsuit to stop the sale and get the book back.
This is the classic art law dilemma, isn't it? Greek Orthodox Patriarchate versus Christie's.
It pits 2 innocent parties against each other. You have the Patriarchate, whose property was stolen during a catastrophe, and you have the purchaser's family, who held it for 70 years and claimed they bought it in good faith.
The legal questions here get so complex. Why New York?
Because the auction was in New York, so that established jurisdiction. But right away, the court runs into a choice of law problem. The collector had bought it in France, and it had been there for 70 years. So the court ultimately applied French law.
Which is much more favorable to the current owner.
Much more. Under French law, title can pass to a good faith purchaser after 30 years of prescriptive possession.
Which means the Patriarchate lost.
Well, the court decided the seller had clear title under French law. But here's where the legal sources we looked at get really critical. Even if New York law had applied, the court signaled the claim would still likely have failed.
And New York law usually favors the original owner through something called the demand and refusal rule. Can you break that down for us?
Right. So the demand and refusal rule says that the statute of limitations, the time limit to sue, doesn't start running until the original owner demands the art back and the possessor says no.
It sounds great for the victim of a theft.
It does, but it's not foolproof. The New York court in this case said that even with that rule, the Patriarchate's claim would probably be barred by a different doctrine called laches.
Laches.
Laches. It's an equitable defense. It basically says you can't bring a claim if you unreasonably delayed and that delay hurt the other party. The court pointed out that the Patriarchate didn't even seem to know the book was missing until 1998.
Wait a minute. So the court is saying you weren't diligent enough while your country was collapsing and your church was being evacuated. I mean, that feels like a legal sledgehammer for a really sensitive historical problem.
And that is the absolute core of the controversy. The sources we read argue that by strictly enforcing laches, courts unfairly punish institutional owners like the Patriarchate. You can't expect an order of monks to conduct diligent international searches for every missing book while they're dealing with the collapse of an empire.
It seems like it shifts the burden unfairly. It's treating this institution, which was operating under duress, the same as it would an individual collector who just, misplaced a painting.
That's the takeaway. The lack of diligence was a function of political chaos, not negligence. And the sources argue that for New York to avoid becoming a haven for stolen artwork, courts need to be more flexible. They need to consider the true historical circumstances of the theft.
That makes a lot of sense. So the legal outcome might have been unsatisfying for the original owners, but the story for scholarship, for knowledge, it doesn't end there.
Not at all. The anonymous buyer turned out to be a philanthropist. They immediately loaned the manuscript to the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore in 1999 for study, and they funded the entire massive project themselves.
And this was the moment the deep dive into the hidden text really began.
Right. Scholars quickly realized that Heiberg's amazing 1906 transcriptions, made with just a magnifying glass, were incomplete. The mold, the grime, those bizarre gold forgeries, traditional photography just couldn't get through it all.
So we shift from history and law to, well, technological marvels. This project became famous for pioneering advanced imaging techniques to peel back those 800 years of layers.
They used multispectral imaging, which uses different wavelengths of light, and that helped a bit. But the real game changer was X-ray fluorescence imaging, XRF.
The science of getting ink to speak from the grave. How does XRF get through things like mold and gold paint?
It's all about the chemistry of the ink. The Archimedes text was written with iron gall ink, a common medieval recipe, and XRF is designed to target the chemical signature of the iron, the Fe in that ink.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning the X-rays penetrate right through the prayers, the mold, the grime, the gold paint. But when they hit the trace elements of iron from Archimedes' ink, that iron fluoresces. A sensor then maps that fluorescence, and it creates a perfect digital image of the original text, right through all the physical interference.
That sounds almost miraculous, but how painstaking was this? Were they really just doing one tiny bit of a page at a time?
It was an act of extreme patience. The work was done at high-tech facilities like the SSRL synchrotron, a particle accelerator lab. They were moving millimeter by millimeter. It could take a full day to process a single half page. The whole project took years.
But the effort paid off. I mean, in spades. They didn't just recover complete, accurate transcriptions of Archimedes' treatises.
No, they found brand new classical texts that had been totally invisible to Heiberg, invisible even to the earlier imaging techniques. They found speeches by the Athenian orator Archimedes, the only surviving example of his work in a manuscript book, and a 3rd century commentary on Aristotle's categories.
So the monk who repurposed this parchment in 1229 didn't just scrub off Archimedes, he basically destroyed an entire small library of lost classical knowledge. And XRF brought it all back.
It did. And the XRF work was so critical because it revealed that Heiberg's transcriptions of the method, while heroic, were incomplete and in some places just wrong because of the damage. The modern scientific process gave us the most accurate version we will ever have.
So when we step back, what does this all mean? This one damaged book, it synthesizes two massive narratives: the incredible, almost stubborn resilience of ancient knowledge and the profound difficulty of applying modern law to historical crimes.
On the legal front, the lesson is pretty clear. Courts have to move beyond these rigid, singular rules like latches. They have to combine legal approaches and take all the historical circumstances into account, especially with institutional owners who suffered losses during the geopolitical collapse. Otherwise, these decisions just create incentives for theft.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. The true genius of Archimedes, his grasp of infinitesimals centuries before Newton and Leibniz, was almost lost forever. The anonymous buyer, by funding this recovery, ensured that knowledge was secured. Since the entire Palimpsest project has published all the raw data and transcriptions freely on the web for everyone, does the successful recovery and democratization of this knowledge ultimately provide a greater benefit to society than deciding who holds the physical title to a piece of moldy parchment?